Hey, what's happening? It is Tuesday, and we know what that means. It's Tune Up Tuesday, and I'm Dietrich Wallace, and I hope everybody's doing well. But this lesson that we're going to get into today comes from John chapter 6, verses 1 through 14, which is where Jesus feeds the 5,000. That being said, there are so many lessons that we can learn from this, but I'm going to highlight just a few of them so that we can get a good understanding as far as what this is really talking about and what we can really glean from the text. You know, oftentimes we see things or we see situations where we can only think of a solution from our human perspective, but when Christ gets involved, there's nothing impossible because everything becomes possible because he is involved. Now, of course, we know that in this portion of scripture that the disciples were faced with a dilemma. Here we had a multitude of people, and they were going to need something to eat. The problem is that the disciples didn't have enough to feed the 5,000. And here we're going to read about a young lad that had 2 little fishes and 5 loaves of barley bread. And we'll see what Jesus can do with that. And we'll find out that when we give what little we have, because all we have is a little as compared to as far as resources, as compared to what God has, because all the resources are his, because the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Everything belongs to God. So let's go ahead and let's get into it right quick, and let's get some stuff out of here so that we can we can fine tune some things in our lives when it comes to this area. Let's get after it. In verse number 1, that's where we're going to start at. It said, after these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great multitude followed him because they saw his miracles, which he did on them that were diseased. Let's stop right here. Now, one thing about it, when God gets involved in your life, and he does miracle, he performs a miracle in your life, and other people can see it, that's going to draw them to him. If you remember, Jesus said if he be lifted up, he'll draw all men unto him. If we lift up God's name and we tell others about the things he's done in our lives, that's going to give them hope that he can do something in theirs. And that's one of the main things we need to be doing, is letting people know and letting people see the work that God has done in our individual lives. Let's go a little further. And Jesus went up into a mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. And the Passover feast of the Jews was nigh. Nigh meaning near. When Jesus then lifted up his eyes, he saw a great company come unto him, and he says, Philip, where shall we buy bread that these may eat? Well, why did he ask? Why did he ask Philip that? Well, the reason for that is Philip was from Bethsaida, which wasn't far from where they were at that point. So he would definitely know or have a good idea where they could go buy some food. But on the other hand, Jesus asked him that question because he already knew what he was going to do. But he was asking him from his human perspective, what were we going to do to solve this monumental problem? This thing this problem of feeding 5,000 people, 5,000 men. So it wasn't just men. They probably had their wives and their children. So it's probably even more than that. But we're going to go a little further and we're going to see what happens here. It says, and this he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. Jesus already knew what he was going to do before he asked the question. Our Father knows what we need before we even ask. But at the same time, we have to be reminded that we are limited, but God is not. We can't limit God by what we think he should be able to do based on our own human understanding. That's a problem that we all have to keep in perspective, we have to keep that in our mind that there's no limit we can place on God, because we as people are the only ones that are limited. Philip answered him in true human fashion, 200 pennyworth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. So now Peter, in his human mind, is like, hey, look, no matter how much money we got, we don't have enough to feed all of those folks. So what are we going to do? How many situations have you come in contact with in your lifetime that you knew you may have had something you could have put on it, but you knew it wasn't going to be enough to solve the problem? Well, I believe all of us have been there. But when God gets involved, we'll see what happens with a little bit of something. Let's go a little further. In verse number 8, it says, one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said unto him, there's a lad here which hath 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes, but what are they among so many? So here again, they're looking at it from a human perspective. They haven't counted on that Jesus already has the solution. They haven't counted on that, they're kind of looking over the fact this little lad, this little boy has these 2 little fishes and 5 barley loaves. But that's one thing we need to think about. Never overlook anyone, because you never know where your blessing's going to come from. You never know where the proverbial ram in the bush is. God does, though. Let's keep going. And Jesus said, make the men sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in a number about 5,000. So Jesus was going to say, look, now you got to imagine, Jesus is sitting here thinking, now I already know what I'm going to do, how I'm going to handle this. So look, y'all just make those men sit down, okay? Make them sit down. Because there's plenty of grass for everybody to sit. Just make them sit down. So verse 10, and Jesus says, verse 11, and Jesus took the loaves. Now let's keep track of what's happening here. It says Jesus took the loaves. So that means the little bit that the lad had, Jesus is now in Jesus' hands. Just as the little we have, if we'll put it in Jesus' hands, that's when the miracle's going to happen. Let's keep going. It says, so, and Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to the disciples, and the disciples to them that were set down, and likewise of the fishes as they would. So here we have Jesus has got it in his hands now. He's got the fish, he's got the bread, he gave thanks, which we should do. We should always bless our food before we eat, and be thankful for what God has provided for us. So now, when it leaves Jesus' hands, it's multiplied. Anything you give God, he can multiply it. But the key is, you got to give it to him. It's the service, it's the time, it's the using of the ability that God has given each one of us for his glory, for his kingdom. You see, if we just hoard it up and keep it for ourselves, God can't multiply. God's not going to multiply that. You got to give up something. You got to put in something in order to get something out of it. But also, never underestimate what your contribution can do. Because again, like I said, once you put it in God's hands, he can multiply this thing, whatever it may be. Okay, he says when they were filled. Now, hold on. It says when they were filled, there was no lack. They didn't just have a snack. They ate and they were full. They were full. He said unto the disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. Now hold up, wait a minute. From these 2 little fishes and these 5 barley loaves, now Jesus has multiplied it and fed over 5,000 people. And there's leftovers. there is leftovers. You see, when you give it to him, it's Jesus is in abundance. Anything he does for you is going to be in abundance. So that being said, there were leftovers. But first, there had to be a little lad that gave up his 2 little fishes and 5 barley loaves. Never be afraid to put anything in God's hands. Never. Because once you put it in there, that's when the miracle is going to happen. And we have to be able and wrap our minds around the fact that we may be limited, but he's not. Give your time, your service, your resource, of your resources. Give it to him. And watch the impact that it can have on so many others and not just yourself. Okay. He said, therefore they gathered them together and filled 12 baskets with fragments of the 5 barley loaves which remained over and above unto them that had eaten. Now they talk about abundance. Over and above. Not under and beneath, but over and above. Verse 14. Then those men, when they had seen the miracle that Jesus did, said, this is of a truth that prophet that should come into the world. What are they referring to there? They're talking about Deuteronomy 18, chapter 18, verse 15, where Moses said, there's going to be a prophet raised up like unto him, and him shall they hear. And that was none other than Jesus Christ. I hope everybody has got a good understanding from this video today. And I hope you understand that if we just give of our limited resources and we put it in God's hands, it can all be multiplied because he doesn't have a limit. Can't put him in a box. I appreciate all the support. Thanks for the likes, the shares, and the comments. And I'll see y'all soon, hopefully, on Sunday morning. Talk to y'all later.